cover stitch lengths. What length should you be using when you're making a basting stitch, a quilting stitch, piecing, or foundation paper piecing? Let's cover all 4 of those today. On my machine, I have a regular piecing foot and some cotton quilting thread. I want to start with the longest stitch length, basting. When you're basting, what you want to do is create a stitch that holds all your layers together, but something that's easy to take out later if you need to. A lot of time, basting stitches are temporary. Sometimes you can get them hidden in your binding later on, but sometimes you're going to have to remove them. So you want something that's easy to seam rip. That means a longer stitch length. I like to go with something around 4 to 4.5. For me, that's long enough to be able to take out later, but not so long that it might cause some puckering issues from bunching together because your thread is so far apart. Let's see what that looks like on our machine. You can see that I didn't backstitch in the beginning, and I'm not going to backstitch here at the end. I'm just going to cut my thread, because when we're basting, we're thinking that we're going to be taking these stitches out later, and backstitches are going to make that much more difficult. You can see how long the stitch length is. It's going to be really nice and easy to take out later. When you're quilting, you also want to use a longer stitch length, but not quite this long. Quilting with a longer stitch length gives the fabric a little bit more flexibility and stretch. You're able to make sure that it's going to have a nice drape and move around without having too much tension from that thread. When I'm quilting, I like to use something around 3 to 3.5. I'll show you what a 3 looks like. If I was quilting, I might use a walking foot to really make sure that I'm feeding through all those layers evenly as well. So our basting stitch was a 4.5, and our quilting stitch is a 3. You can definitely see the difference in the stitch length. We're going to keep going down as far as stitch length goes when we go to piecing. When you're piecing, you want a stitch length that's going to hold your pieces together nicely. It doesn't have to be super, super tiny, because when you're thinking that every time your needle goes down, you're piercing a hole through your fabric, which also weakens your fabric. So you don't want to get it so small that your fabric integrity is compromised. But the one thing that you don't want is that as you're manipulating your blocks and sewing them together, that your stitches are coming apart and unraveling at the corners. So I like to use a stitch length between a 2 to 2.5. I'm going to use a 2.2 today. And that's what this looks like. It gives me really nice stability that if I pull here, it's not coming apart right away. This is really helpful as you're going to be putting different blocks together. And our smallest stitch is when we're foundation paper piecing. This is the exception to the rule where you want a really small stitch. The benefit of this is twofold. The first is that because you're sewing on a piece of paper, you're going to be ripping that piece of paper out later. The small stitches make lots of perforations in your paper, making it easy to tear out later. The second reason you want a small stitch is because you're putting a lot of stress on your stitches when you're ripping those papers out. The smaller stitch helps bring stability that you need to make sure that all of your pieces are going to stay together nicely. So we are going to put our third piece down on here. And for this, I'm going to bring my stitch length down even further to about a 1.5. I'm going to move my needle. I like to move my needle when I'm foundation paper piecing to the center so that I can follow the red dot. It's a really nice way to guide my needle. I like to go a little bit slower too. That allows me to follow that line on the paper nice and easy. And those are 4 different stitch lengths you can do for foundation paper piecing, for regular piecing, for quilting, and for basting.